a group of people who are part of what we call the First Nations or the American Indians. Two particular groups were targeted by the U.S. government. And some of their best and brightest and most intelligent and the healthiest of their men were taken by the U.S. government. And people want to see the government's doing it again. We rounded them up, we put them on reservations because we were just taking their land. And now look, we were taking the best and brightest, but people didn't know what was going on. You see, this was in the beginning of World War I that this happened. And they actually went to the Cherokee and the Cochaw nations, and they took their best and brightest, the ones who could speak English really well, but also were fluent in their native tongue. And they asked them to join the U.S. military to be code talkers. Or another title is wind talkers. It started in World War I. It was so successful that after World War I, some of the other nations thought, there's these languages no one's ever heard of before. And they were used by the U.S. government to break or to communicate clearly, so that World War I ended because of these these people's ability to speak a language no one knows. We need to figure out what these are. So nations actually sent anthropologists to America to study the American Indians, to discover what their language was. And one of the nations that did that happened to be Germany. And they actually went to the Cherokee and the Choctaw people and studied them, thinking, okay, because they were already planning some of the stuff that was going to happen in World War II. And then we need to learn this language. And they didn't realize how many First Nations we had in America. How many different peoples of American Indian descent we had here. And so when World War II started, this roundup by the government happened again. And people, again, assumed that they were rounding up. And now look, it's spread from just two tribes to, it's national. They're collecting people from every tribe. And people jumped to their own conclusion. But once again, they were gathering people from all of these people groups because of the unique language they spoke. And because of their ability to communicate and their willingness to join the U.S. Armed Forces and to go serve in World War II, because of that, some of the major battles were planned and executed without the enemy ever knowing what was going on because they couldn't break the code. And most people in the United States didn't know about it until 30 years later, when finally their mission was declassified and people realized, no, the American government wasn't being mean to the American Indians. They were actually showing them a special honor, saying, you have what we can't do. And the most famous happens to be the wind talkers or the code talkers happens to be the Navajo people. To this day, the only spoken code in the military that has never been broken or figured out is the Navajo codes that were used during World War II. It has never been broken by any intelligence agency in the world. And they helped win some of the crucial battles that turned the tide of World War II. But so many people got so upset because look, the best and brightest of these people groups are being hoarded or taken away and herded up by the U.S. government. What's going to happen? And sometimes we have these little ideas. We get a little bit of information. We go, oh yeah, I know what's going to happen. And we jump to conclusions and we choose poorly how we respond. You see, the U.S. government, in the areas I'm talking about, chose very wisely. They went and they realized that these languages were unique to this continent. And if you were part of the people group, you didn't even understand it. Different groups, different tribes couldn't communicate with each other. They had to find a common language, a trade language to use, because they couldn't understand even one another. So the American government chose very wisely, and it impacted the history of our world. I want you to think about that. A wise choice by a few people can impact the history of our world. And today we have the choice to choose wisely. To choose wisely as we look at this idea of always being prepared for what God has. And I can guarantee you God has incredible things in store. I can't wait to shift focus in a moment. It's not really shifting focus, it's just stepping into the new phase of what God has for us this year. I am so excited about the potential that sits in this room and what God wants to do. And we're already seeing people latch on to the idea, even though I haven't presented the idea to the church, they're already latching on and they don't realize it. Which I love how God does that. God gets us ready for the year, and people are already jumping on with the theme of the year before they even know the theme of the year, which you guys are going to be introduced to later this month. But we have to be prepared. And we can't be prepared unless we are prepared God's way. Now, I want you to understand, when we turn to our text, which is Luke chapter 16, a bunch of you are going to look at it and go, okay, I know what Pastor Rob's talking about, but you don't. Unless you caught the one verse that explains what this is all about. And most of us don't catch that one verse, so let's turn to Luke chapter 16. And we're going to start reading in verse 1. Luke 16, verse 1. And again, I want you to keep your eyes open because things don't always appear to be what they appear to be. And this is one of those classic cases. And as we read, I'm just going to start by reading the first 9 verses, then we're going to go back to our text and read a little bit more. But as you're turning there, I want you to be reminded that always being prepared means that we have a giving heart, and it's found in our willingness to give. And our heart condition determines that preparedness. And then the test is our tithing and how we respond to that. And true happiness comes from answering who's on first, which we talked about last week. Last week was all about making sure God is why we do what we do and who we do it for, period. And some of us might have gotten distracted. And this week I want us to understand that it's all about the importance of our choice and why we're choosing what we're choosing. And we can get distracted by the illustration given here, but don't get distracted. Focus on the main thing. So let's start in verse 1 of chapter 16 of the book of Luke. It says this. Jesus told his disciples, there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account for your management, because you can no longer be manager any longer. The manager said to himself, what shall I do? I know my master is taking away my job, and I'm not strong enough to dig. I'm too ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do. When I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their homes. So he called in each of his master's debtors. And he asked the first, how much do you owe my master? 800 gallons of olive oil, he replied. The manager told him, take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 400. Then he asked the second, and how much do you owe? 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. He told him, take your bill, and make it 800. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself, so that when it is gone, you'll be welcomed into eternal dwelling. Now, I want to stop right there because it's kind of an odd story. Here's a dishonest, bad manager who's being used by Jesus as a great example. God, you're using a dishonest, sinful person as an example of what we should do. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Well, let's not jump to conclusions because we need to make sure we understand what is going on here. And I want to read just a little bit more. Starting in verse 10, it says, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with a very little will be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? Now that last sentence, that last question in verse 10 is the key to what this story is about. It's not about worldly wealth. It's about true riches, which is eternal souls of the people around us. I want you to think about that because every example, every illustration, what we're going to talk about, yes, does deal with the illustration because Jesus makes it the illustration on purpose. But it's not about the illustration. That's a teaching mechanism to help us understand that if we can't take care of what we have, God's not going to give us eternal blessings, eternal riches, which is the salvation of our loved ones, our friends, our co-workers. We have this list that keeps growing of people that we add to the list of those that we want to see saved. They're our friends, they're our family, they're our co-workers. And God's never going to say, yes, you can have these people if we're not good stewards of what we already have. God wants to give us more. He wants to see us amazed with how many people get saved because there's always room for more people in our church. We can always fit more people in. That's not the issue. The issue is, are we going to be good with what God's given us? So what has God given you already? I want you to think about that. Because some of us are sitting here going, I'm on fixed income. I don't have a lot. I was talking with my dad about that. He's on a fixed income, and he used to be on salary at the church, but now they give him what they call a stipend, which here we're going to give you a little bit to cover your expenses of doing the ministry that you're doing, because he's older. He's maybe retired, and he gets to set his own schedule. So they've given him the stipend, and he goes, my stipend meant my income was cut drastically. But he's still a good steward. It was interesting to go shopping with him. So I went shopping with my dad and my older brother. My older brother sold his house, bought a large motorhome, travels around the country because he can work from anywhere, and he just goes and has fun traveling around the country, taking his wife and his son to see the sights because he makes really good money. Then you take my dad, who's on a fixed income, and that income has been shrunk. You take my brother, who has more money than he knows what to do with, and then you take me, the father of 10, and you send us shopping. We all have different perspectives. My dad is much more along my perspective now. He goes, you know what? I found some really good snacks. We should go get some snacks. I said, great, Dad, where are we going to go? He goes, Dollar Tree. And I smiled because most of our Christmas snacks and New Year's snacks came from Dollar Tree because they have some decent tasting ones now. And my brother goes, Dollar Tree? Kind of looking down his nose. We should just go to like Target. I'm like, no. Target for snacks. Think about it. Come on, Steve. Target for snacks? But I'd rather pay a little bit more knowing, okay, you can do that, but we're going to Dollar Tree, and since Dad's driving, you're stuck coming with us. But just different perspectives. And yet it was, are we going to be good stewards of what God has given us? Now, my dad's always been in this incredibly disciplined person and good steward of everything God's given him. So my kids, even though my dad said he was going to stop doing this, my kids still get presents from my dad, and it's usually money presents. And I look at what my 4-year-old twins got and go, Dad, the entire time I lived at your house, I never got that much from you. Ever. And now my kids are getting that. No. But it's because my dad's been a good steward. He's taken the little that he has, and he lets God do incredible things. And so as we look at this idea, the principle that we're talking about is an eternal principle. Are we going to be good stewards of the souls that he's given us? But we can't look at the eternal until we look at what we already have. Are we being good stewards of what God's given us now? And so he talks about this whole idea, and he has this manager. This manager who's not a good guy. In fact, he's done such a lousy job, he's going to be fired. But he goes, okay, I haven't actually been called in. I've been warned it's coming. I'm going to have to go see my master, and he's going to fire me. I'm not going to have a job anymore. What can I do to make sure I'm taken care of? And so he goes in, and without permission, he cuts all these bills in half so that people are happy with him. And he's commended for it. Why? Because he was shrewd. And I want us to understand something. It's our very first point. And it's kind of a confusing point at first because half your Bibles won't say this. Because they changed the word. But the whole idea that mammon, or in parentheses, riches, has the power to change lives. That's what it talks about here, what we looked at. This man said, I want to do something that when I don't have a job, people will gladly welcome me into their homes. So I'm going to take the riches that I have control of, and I'm going to utilize them in such a way that people are going to be happy when they see me after I lose my job. Now, some of you have money. Has the control to change lives. And that's what's listed in your book, in your translation. And that is a common translation, but I use mammon not because the King James has it, but because in this particular text it's talking about riches in a different way than just finances. And it's actually talking about the power that rests upon those riches. And I want to give you a little bit of a grammatical history here. Not to bore you, but to help you understand why I chose to use the word mammon. Because it's not a common word that we use today, but it's important that we understand that. And that is, to understand, we need to understand the origin of the word. The origin of the word isn't just riches. So there's a number of verses throughout the Bible that use this term. And to understand the term, we have to go back to the Aramaic. And the word in Aramaic literally means riches, and it's derived from a Syrian god, the god of riches. And it dates back to the Babylonian time. And The God of riches, one of his main attributes is he plants confusion in people's hearts. And he does this by making the riches more important than anything else. And you can see this even in the Babylonian Empire. If you study history, you can see that they went from being a people that was united around world conquest to, oh, look at us, we are rich and we have whatever we want. And they started worshiping the riches and what they had, and they forgot to guard their borders, and eventually they were destroyed by another empire. Because this principle, this curse, this power that rests upon finances was there to distract and confuse them. And the truth is, we still struggle with that today. We struggle with the curse that's resting upon our finances, and the Spirit tries to take the place of God by making us focus on finances or riches. And I say that not money, because it's more than that, because we all get caught up in this whole thing. Oh, look, I have a house. I need to make the payment. And if I don't work to make the payment, then I'm not being a good steward of my time and energy. And, my kids want me to go to the game, but no, I have to work late so I can make the payment. And all of a sudden, the payment becomes the thing that we're living for, instead of just a blessing that's in our life. Why? Because this curse that rests upon riches has stolen our hearts and confused us. I could tell you the story of a man who was a brilliant financier. He worked with international markets. He had a great business that was going, and he would study the markets, and he did a really good job. And then he got this idea, if I could just get investors and I could pool the money, we could make more money off of this. And so he was a Christian man. He went to his church, and his church was a sizable church. And he went to the church, and he started approaching. He started with the pastor. And the pastoral staff said, you guys have known me for years. This is what I'm doing, and I've developed this program that will help us. Would you invest in it? And out of this church, like I said, it was a sizable church. He had millions of dollars invested. People took their savings and their retirement and put it in his hands to deal with and to make a profit out of. The thing is, when he started having the cash flow come in, he got enamored with how much money he had control of. Now, it wasn't his money, but he goes, wow, look at how much people trust me. Look how great I am. I'm this great manager of finances. And he stopped working on the program that he had promised, and he started living off of the millions that had come in. He built a mansion that had your secret rooms. So a bookcase would, if you did it right, it would all of a sudden pop up a little bit and swivel, and you'd walk into a secret den that was a library. He had secret hallways and stairways in his house because he built it all on these people's money. Well, when people started saying, okay, we need to start seeing a return on our investment, and he had to develop the program, even though he had the ability. You see, he had all the ability to follow through on what he did, but he got distracted by the riches that came in. He lost track of the focus, so he never finished developing the program. So when people said, we need a return for our finances because we gave you everything and now we need to start seeing a return, he didn't have any of it. And the guilt of that started weighing upon him. So one day he got on his Harley Davidson and he started driving down the straightest stretch of highway that was in the area. And he happened to crest a hill, and he could see for 10 miles. And he started going faster and faster and faster. And about 6 miles into it, he slowly drifted into the oncoming lane in front of a semi and killed himself. Because the guilt overcame him, because he was a bad steward of what had happened, because this curse that was upon riches had captured his heart. Now, I use that as an illustration because here was a good, upstanding Christian brother who loved God and wanted to be a blessing to other Christians in his church by helping them. But when the finances came in, the glitter of the gold, so to speak, the magic of the money captured his heart and his attention and caused confusion. It's not about having, it's about being a good steward. And he wasn't even a steward anymore. He was just stealing from people. And that guilt overcame him, and to the point where he decided, I would rather die than live with the guilt. So he did that. He didn't take into account what would happen with his wife and his young kids. He didn't take into account the emotional damage he did to the trucker, who all of a sudden had this motorcycle that was going about 110 pulled in front of him. There's no way to stop. Because of the curse that rests upon riches. That goes back to a Babylonian god that was the god of finances, and that's where this term comes from. Now here's the question. What do we do about this? We all have money. We have to deal with it. How do we handle it? Well, it's simple. The way to get the Spirit of God on our riches instead of a curse on our riches is by giving it to God. And we've talked about this in the past. We're supposed to give God everything. But God says, give me everything, but show me a token of that by trusting me with 10%. That brings God's blessing upon what we have. It redeems the finances. And so the way it is in your notes is the way we get God's Spirit on our riches is through tithing the first 10% so that He redeems the rest. It all of a sudden becomes a blessing instead of a curse. All of a sudden we have more than we know what to do with. Why? Because God's taking care of it because He's now blessed what has been a curse. You see, so often we quote this saying that is biblical, but we quote it wrong. People will often say that money is the root of all evil, and it's not money. It's the love of money, and it comes from one of the verses that says it's the love of mammon, riches, that is the root of all evil. Don't let things become the stuff that capture your heart. And remember, this isn't about finances, it's about eternity and souls. But if you can't trust someone with that, how are you going to trust them with something that lasts forever? It's kind of like when my kids start getting old enough, I say, okay guys, you guys want a pet, well why don't you go and make sure you can feed the chickens every day? Before you have an animal that's solely yours, it's responsible for love and nurture, why don't you go feed the chickens every day and make sure you can do that every day without any issues? And there's a struggle. They actually say if people want to start having relationships, give them a plant. If the plant dies, don't trust them with anything else. Because they don't take time to nurture it. And so some people who don't have green thumbs, they actually have the opposite, go, wow, I shouldn't have ever gotten in a relationship because every plant I've had is dead. It's just what some people say. And then they say if people do good with the plant, give them a pet. And if the pet thrives, then let them start dating or whatever as a parent. But the whole idea is prove your faithfulness in the little things before you jump into eternity. But many of us say, I want my spouse to get saved. I want my brother and sister to get saved. I want my parents to get saved. I want my kids to get saved. And yet we're not honoring God in anything else. And God's going, I can't trust you because you haven't shown that you trust me. And the eternal soul is so much more valuable than anything else we have on this earth. I want God to bring in souls by the hundreds. I want to see the New Testament lived out in our church where people are getting saved every day because we're out there witnessing, because God trusts us enough that says they will be faithful because they've been proven faithful, so I'm going to bless them every day with new souls. And we're seeing those people discipled and nurtured and built up and part of our family. I want that. I pray for that. But I know that if we're not a good steward of our finances, God isn't going to trust us with the eternity of someone else. So let's go back. Are we good stewards? You see, mammon or riches can change lives. But we must be careful how we use it or the results could be disastrous. And I think one of the great examples of this comes from ancient literature, not ancient, but older literature and modern movies. And it's all based on the Bible. And it's the whole Lord of the Rings story. Because in there is a special treasure. And Gollum gets this treasure. And it's his, mine, my precious. My precious. It's a pretty gold ring that he keeps. And that ring becomes everything to him. It didn't start out that way. If you look at the story and read the books, it starts out with he finds this ring when he's fishing. Oh, it's a cute thing. Some of us either like to or hope to do treasure hunting with metal detectors. I think it's a fascinating thing to do because I like to see what people have lost and buried and stuff. So that I like that idea. But I'm never going to find a ring and go, oh, this is so valuable. I'm going to forsake my whole family because I have this ring. This ring is beautiful. It's my precious. My wife used to be precious, not anymore. It's this ring. My kids, humbug. The ring. No. And I know a couple of the people in the church that do that. And they would never do that to their family. Why? Because it's just stuff you find. It's an added blessing to life. We need to understand that the stuff we have is an added blessing to life. The precious thing is our relationship with God. The precious thing is eternity in the souls of the people around us. That's what's precious. Don't let the trappings of the society we live in rob us of the true treasures that God has given us. Don't let it turn us into a grumpy little old guy that runs around in caves. Okay? We don't want to be that. We want to be people living for God and loving God. So let's go back to our scripture. And as we continue the story, we see that riches has this control and this ability to change lives. And that's that first point. It determines our effectiveness, or it has the ability to change our future and change our lives. But let's pick up, I want to go back and start again in verse 9 where it says this. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself, so that when it is gone, you'll be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? No servant can serve two masters. Either he will hate one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. This is the other one of the other verses that is translated mammon. You can't serve God and mammon. And it goes on, verse 14. The Pharisees who loved money heard this, and they were sneering at Jesus. He said to them, "You are the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of men, but God knows your hearts. What is highly valued among men is detestable in God's sight." I want you to think about that. The things we value. In fact, it's so detestable in God's sight that he goes, the thing you guys go to war over, the thing you guys value more than anything else, the thing you guys want to get. In fact, when every nation's economy starts to fall apart, this is where they invest their money, gold. That's so worthless, we're going to pay the streets of heaven with it. But we will die for it. We will go to war for it. We will fight for it. We will rob and steal. We will lie to one another to get more of it. And God says, stop. Don't do that. Focus on what's really important. Choose wisely who you're going to serve. It ends by saying we have a choice of the masters we're going to serve. We're either going to serve God as our master, and he's a gracious, loving, and good God that wants the best for us, or we're going to serve mammon, which is going to make us forsake everything for the sake of getting more. If you go back in human history, in American history, during the Great Depression, there was one man who was making millions of dollars. He has mansions all over the U.S. that he built in the midst of the Depression. Anybody know who I'm talking about? He was a newspaper tycoon. Anybody know who I'm talking about? Rockefeller. And he actually, Daddy Warbucks in the Annie story is based on him. On at least his wealth and his finances. And one day they interviewed him. Okay, this is the height of the Depression. Most of the country, most of the world is suffering. He's loaded. He has more money than he knows what to do with. And they asked him, how much money do you need to get? How much is enough? And his answer was, just a little bit more. The richest man in the world said, I just need a little bit more, because he was so obsessed with having more. We need to make sure that we don't become a slave to the finances around us. It's actually one of the things that I respect about the man who held the world's richest title for the most years. And that's Bill Gates. I'm not saying I respect him for a lot of things, but at the height of his wealth, when he was, for I think the 20th year in a row, the richest man in the world, billions, he said, I'm going to step down from being the head of my company. Because I need to figure out what to do with my finances. And my wife and I, we have decided to start a nonprofit organization on how to give away billions of dollars. Because he didn't want to serve the money, he wanted the money to serve people. And so he spends his entire life, he and his wife, their entire life is spent around how do we give away this money? Because he still is a majority stockholder in Microsoft. He's still making billions of dollars. He's the second or third richest guy in the world now. But he's trying to figure out how to give away a fortune. Because he doesn't want it to control him, and he also doesn't want it to control his child. So we need to understand something. And our second point this morning is simply this. How we treat mammon or riches determines our effectiveness for eternity. And that's going back to that key verse about true riches. How you treat what you have now will affect or impact your effectiveness for eternity. So if you're a stingy old penny pincher that doesn't even smile at people because that would cost you too much. You know, the typical Scrooge from the Christmas stories. You will not be able to share the love of God with anybody. Because you're going to be too busy watching who's going to steal from you today, or who's out to get you, what angle they're coming at you, that you're not going to have any generosity, any compassion for anybody else. But if you're not worried about that, because it's all God's anyway, you're going to look for opportunities to bless the people around you. You're going to look for opportunities. When little things happen and all of a sudden you have extra money, you're going to go, wow, God must have given me this for a reason. I wonder who he wants me to pass it on to. Many of us know someone who was exactly like that by the time you met him. His name is Jim Lattery. And I remember sitting with him and he goes, Pastor Rob, I forgot I had money saved away in this account because the business I worked for back then closed down, and I thought they liquidated and transferred everything, but I just got this check for $5,000. I don't need it. It's not part of my budget. Will you pray with me that God will show me where he wants me to give the money? He didn't keep a penny of it. Why? Because it was God's money, and he wasn't planning on it. If God gave it to him, it must be to give to someone else. And he was never stingy about that. We tend to focus on the stuff we get. Oh, my car. I love my car. And my car gets me from here to there, and no one can do anything to my car. But never have kids and never let them drive your cars. Okay? Just saying that right now. But I've told my kids, even when they tell me something happened while they were driving, are you okay? The car is just something. It's God's car. He'll take care of it. I'm not worried about it. Are you okay? Because that's the bottom line. Their well-being is way more valuable than something I have. I talked about this one day at a youth group, and said, if my house burned down, it's God's house, no big deal. We went home that night, and there had been a fire in our house. God let me try to live out what I'd just been teaching the youth group. Unfortunately, God had it all taken care of. We didn't worry about it. We trusted God, and he did take care of it. The question is, how are you treating the riches God's given you? It doesn't have to be riches as in American standard for riches. Because I want you to understand something. If you have any money in a bank anywhere, if you have food in a fridge anywhere, you are richer than 80% of the world today. I want you to think about that. Any money in a bank, whether it's $2 or $2,000 or $2 million, if you have any money in a bank account and you have any food in the fridge waiting for you to eat when you get home, you are richer than 80% of the world today. You have wealth. You just don't think so because you compare yourself to everyone else because you're focused on stuff instead of blessing God. But what are you doing with your wealth? What are you doing with your riches? Maybe you're in that stage of life where you don't have a job anymore and you have a wealth of time. What are you doing with your time? Well, what do you mean, Pastor? Well, if that's the abundance that God has given you, he wants you to use it wisely. You're being a good steward of your time. Because if you're not, and you're sleeping to noon, and then you're watching soap operas all afternoon, and then you're eating bonbons until you fall asleep again, you're wasting your day. You're being a poor steward of the time God's given you. So, how can you expect God to bless you with the salvation of your loved ones if you don't even have time to take care of yourself, let alone invest in discipling them? Because it's not just about their salvation. When God lets us be part of the spiritual birth that happens, it's our job to welcome them into our family like we would welcome a child. A child is completely dependent on us to teach them how to live and thrive and become the adult that they're supposed to be. That's what it is spiritually. That's why when we have someone who raises their hand for salvation, I pair them up with someone in this church. Usually someone that brought them, saying, hey, they came because of you. Now it's your job to walk through them with the purple book, because that's the basic discipleship program we use. That's just our tool. Are we good stewards with that? Because if you had the opportunity and you didn't follow through, do you really expect God to give you another one? It just goes back to, we're focused on the eternal. It's about souls. But if we can't take care of the physical we have here now, how can we do that? And it was really neat because one of the people in our church found out that they were going to be blessed. Blessed with a new car, new to them car. It's much better than their old car. And their old car still runs and gets around. And they said, Pastor, would you pray for me? I'm like, what do you want prayer for? Well, I'm getting this new car, and I have the old one, and God wants me to give it to someone else, and I don't know who needs it. Can you pray that God will show me the right person to give it to? That's what I'm talking about in being a good steward and how you treat mammon or riches. Because in his case, yes, it's a beautiful car, but it's the riches he has. It's the excess, the overflow. And he wants to use it for God's glory. That's what we're talking about. Just little everyday things. But are we doing that because that will give us an opportunity for God to pour spiritual blessings, eternal blessings into our life? Where you can be the spiritual father, grandfather, great-grandfather of millions of people because God says, I trust you to disciple this person because you were faithful here. Here's a life that you can invest in. Are we willing to do that? So how we treat this impacts our effectiveness for eternity. Do you realize that how you treat and use your material riches God has given you directly impacts your effectiveness in making disciples? How can you teach someone else about lordship if you haven't surrendered all your stuff to the Lord? I want you to think about it. You can't because you're not living it out. You can talk about a theory that's in the Bible, but you can't demonstrate it. You can't show it because you're not living it. We need to be willing to do this. Because the true riches are the souls that we have. And we need to make sure that we do this. And it's interesting because as I was preparing, I came across the story and actually heard the pastor share it. He was a pastor of one of the largest churches in the U.S. And he talks about when his daughter got to dating age. And he didn't really believe in dating, so it was about 18 to 20. He had a young man that says, I want to court your daughter. And he understood because the teaching, dating's just playing around. Courting is where you're serious and you want to get married. And they had been friends. They had grown up in church together. And he said, okay, do you know the first process of courting my daughter? He goes, yeah. You're going to check my giving records at the church. He goes, yeah. My daughter told you, huh? Yes, she did. And he was like, yes, sir, she did. And he didn't have any problem with this. And this pastor said, do you realize why I do that? Well, I think it's because you want to make sure that I'm making enough money to support your daughter. He goes, no, I don't care about that. If God wants you to get married, He'll take care of that. He goes, I want to make sure you're being honest with God and not stealing from Him, because if you steal from God, you're going to steal from my daughter too. And I don't want to give my daughter to anyone who's going to steal from her. And that was his standard. And this young man passed the test. Would we pass that same test? What do we steal from God? Pastor, I haven't stealing anything from God. Okay, let's be honest here. How many of us zone out on different things during the day instead of using our time wisely? Now, it doesn't mean we don't have fun and we enjoy relaxation, but how many of us sit down and do something, whether it's on the computer, in front of a TV, read a book, and 4 hours later we realize, wow, it's 1 a.m. I wasted my whole evening. I didn't do anything. Bing, bing, bing. Okay, now that might be one of the areas where you're stealing from God. I'm all for entertainment. I like the entertainment. My kids, my 2 youngest, have gotten in this bad habit. They like to watch satisfying videos before they go to sleep. Because Dad found the way to keep them still is to put on satisfying videos. It's not fail videos, it's not ridiculous things, it's just interesting things to watch. And there's usually just music to it, and so they sit there and fall asleep. No, that's great for a certain portion of time, but if I say, oh honey, I'm going to get the kids to lay down, and then 4 hours later I stumble into bed and fall into bed, I just wasted my evening because I haven't spent it doing what I should be doing. because they were asleep within 10 minutes, and then I spent another 3 hours doing whatever. We do that. We have this tendency to do that. And we steal from God. How many of us sleep in the morning on a regular basis instead of getting up and starting our day with God? And it's even worse when it snows here because, we went to bed, it wasn't this deep, and we got up, and now we have a half hour worth of work to get our car unstuck so that we can go to work, and we definitely don't have time for God because we're going to be late for work. We just stole that opportunity of spending time with God. We need to make sure that we're a good steward of everything God has given us. And I could give illustration after illustration, but I don't need to. What I need to simply say is we can't afford for eternity's sake to submit to the spirit of mammon, to let our love for stuff take over from our love for God and souls. We have to keep it in right balance. The most classic example you'll find of this happening is the story of Judas in the Bible. Judas walked and talked with Jesus. For 3.5 years, he was at Jesus' side watching the miracles happen. And for 3.5 years, he was in charge of the money. And he saw the giving was good. And he let his love for money take over from his love for his Savior. To the point where he was willing to sell Jesus for 30 pieces of silver, the common price of a slave. I want you to think about that. It wasn't riches, it was just the common price for a slave. But he sold Jesus for that because he got his eyes off of it. And it comes down to the very end, verses 13 through 15, where it says, you can't serve two masters. You either love one and hate the other. You'll serve the one and be devoted and despise the other. And that's the truth. I want you to understand this. Either today you are completely emphatically in love with God and you're devoted to Him, or there's parts of what He says that you despise. There's parts of this Bible that you don't ever want to hear talked about and you never want to read. Why? Because you don't like it, because your heart's somewhere else. I want you to think about that for a second. If God says don't do something, you go, killjoy. Well, then your heart isn't devoted to God, it's divided. Oh, God says don't get drunk with wine. Well, it's not wine, it's whiskey, and it's okay, it's rum, it's fine. No, the Bible says don't get drunk. Stop it. Well, he's just a buzzkill and a killjoy. I want to have fun. You can have tons of fun without any alcohol. Trust me, I've been doing it for 50 years. You don't have to have alcohol to be weird and stupid. You can do that all on your own. And you'll remember every moment of it if you don't. So, maybe, okay, you won't go there. But don't despise it when God says don't do it. Realize He's watching out for you. Oh, the Bible says don't have sex before I'm married. Well, he just doesn't understand. I love them, and it feels so good. Yes, it feels good. That's why it's a temptation. If it didn't feel good, no one would want to do it, so who cares? I mean, how many of us shove bamboo slivers under our fingernails for the fun of it? None of us. Why? Because it hurts. There's no fun in it. But God says it'll protect you in so many different ways if you just follow this. It'll guard your heart. It'll guard your mind. It'll make the relationship I give you stick like no other relationship before. Just trust me. But you know how many people I talk to that despise that? God understands because I love them. Yeah, God understands that you're choosing that in pleasure over His perfect will and you're settling for it. Don't. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 10 says this about this whole idea. The love of mammon or money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. And that's the truth. People today, and I used that illustration earlier, a man who chose that, was running after money, and he was so pierced with grief that he took his own life. You see, what many people don't realize is many don't realize it, but they despise God because they are loyal to the riches. We were just talking about that. You might not realize it, but if you're not willing to honor God and pursue what is eternal over what is temporal and having a new car, a bigger TV, whatever, you'll end up despising God. How could God ask me to do that? Doesn't he know I only have 3 cars? And he wants to, you need to give one of my cars to someone who needs it? That's just uncalled for. You ever drive the car? No, I haven't driven it in a year and a half. Why let it rust and rot? Give it to God, let him do what he wants with it. Well, no one will love that beater. Yeah, the person whose car just blew up and doesn't have a way to get to work would love a beater because they don't have any other thing. Trust God. Don't despise God. Trust God. You see, mammon and riches promise us what only God can give us. They promise us security, identity, freedom, happiness, good marriages, respect, power, love, and peace and joy. Only God can give those things. So stop pursuing the distraction and pursue the one who can give you everything you're looking for. So here's my question to you today. Are you pursuing the eternal? Do you want to pursue the eternal? Or are you pursuing the thing that's frustrating you because you can never have enough, you just need a little bit more? Because if that's what you're pursuing, you're always going to need a little bit more. If the richest man in the world said all he needs is a little bit more, I don't know about you, maybe you're a closet billionaire, I'm not. I could always use a little bit more. But I found sufficiency in the God who controls everything. And I'd rather see a soul saved than see more money in the bank account. I really would. Because I want to see the kingdom of God explode as he does even more than we hope or imagine because we're focusing on him and trusting him with everything. So choose wisely. Who is going to be your master today? I want you to think about that as you bow your heads. We are given this choice. And it's a choice of 2 things. God or something else. That's it. There's no third option. There's no, oh, well, I sort of serve God, but here I am going to get this. No, it's either God or something else. Either God or an idol. Because anything that pushes God off, number 1, is an idol. What are you pursuing today? I want you to be very honest. Is it peace, joy, and happiness? And to get that, you've been pursuing this stuff? Maybe it's a better job, maybe it's a nicer car, maybe it's a home, maybe it's a relationship, but you've been pursuing stuff instead of pursuing God. As we wrap things up, I just want you to be honest with yourself. Where is your heart? Because there's this verse that I've mentioned before, but I can't get away from it. Where your heart, or where your treasure is, your heart will follow. So whatever you're treasuring, your heart's going to go there. So if you treasure stuff, if you treasure things, if you treasure success, that's where your heart's going to go. If you treasure pleasure, that's where your heart's going to go. If you treasure God, your heart will go there and you'll find all those other things that you've been hoping for. Where are you going to put your trust? What do you treasure today? If you're sitting here going, Pastor Rob, I have to admit I've been pursuing all this stuff. And I didn't realize stuff had a curse on it. The curse of mammon. But I've been pursuing that. So by default, I've been pursuing a curse on my life. And I don't want to do that anymore, Pastor Rob. I want God to redeem it. Well, then surrender it all to God. Say, God, it's yours. I'm going to show you my token by giving you what you've asked, but I'm surrendering it all to you, God, and I'm just going to pursue you from now on. If that's you today, and God's talking to you, and you want to make this year an incredible year as you serve God, but you know you need to stop pursuing the wrong thing. If that's you, I want to pray for you. So if that's you, I want you to raise your hand and say, Pastor Rob, I need to change focus. I need to choose wisely.